It was hot enough to melt the fake cheer off a garden gnome. Not just hot. It was a thick, personal, vindictive kind of hot. The kind of heat that presses down on you from the sky, radiates up from the asphalt, and conspires to make every waking moment a sticky, miserable ordeal. We were landlocked in the middle of Ohio, in a subdivision so perfectly planned you could feel the architect's obsession in every symmetrically placed shrub. Maple Creek Estates. It sounded pleasant, didn't it? Like a place where gentle breezes rustled through autumnal trees. A lie. It was a solar oven with a homeowners association, and my personal circle of hell was a sweat-drenched patio chair overlooking a patch of grass I was legally required to keep unnaturally green. My name is Frank, and all I wanted was a pool. Not an in-ground, kidney-shaped, look-at-my-stock portfolio kind of pool. I'm not that guy. I just wanted a simple, glorious, above-ground circle of blue vinyl and questionable plumbing. A sanctuary. A baptismal font of relief in the suffocating church of suburbia. I'd found the perfect one online. The Summer Oasis 3000. It was 15 feet across, 4 feet deep, and came with a filter pump that sounded, according to the reviews, like a small, angry badger. It was beautiful. It was affordable. It was, in my fevered mind, the only thing that stood between my family and spontaneous combustion. "You're staring at the pool picture again, aren't you?" Brenda's voice cut through my heat-addled daydream. She was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, holding 2 glasses of iced tea that were already sweating more than I was. My wife is a master of pragmatism, a beautiful, sensible anchor in the sea of my often terrible ideas. "I'm not staring," I said, turning the tablet around to show her the picture for the 100th time. "I'm envisioning a better future, a cooler future. Look at that water. You can almost feel the chill." She handed me a glass, the condensation a brief, blissful shock against my hand. "It's a lovely tub of plastic, Frank. But you know what Carol is like. Did you even look at the HOA bylaws?" Ah, the bylaws. The sacred text of Maple Creek Estates. A document thicker than a phone book for a medium-sized city, filled with rules so specific and arbitrary they must have been written by a committee of retired dictators. "I skimmed them," I lied. "It's fine. It's a temporary structure. We're not building a new wing on the house." "Frank," she said, her voice taking on the patient tone she usually reserved for explaining why we couldn't get a pet capybara. "Article 12 is an entire section on aesthetic harmony. Carol once tried to fine the Hendersons because their wind chimes were, and I quote, tonally aggressive." Carol. The name hung in the air like the humidity itself. Carol Jenkins was the president of our HOA, a woman who wielded her power with the grim satisfaction of a DMV clerk on a Monday morning. She was the alpha and omega of Maple Creek, the arbiter of acceptable shades of beige, the guardian of lawn height, and the sworn enemy of joy in all its unapproved forms. Her own house was a monument to oppressive mediocrity, with petunias that looked like they were too scared to wilt, and a lawn so flawless it looked like it was rendered by a computer. "She's not going to have a problem with a pool," I insisted, my optimism a flimsy shield against the coming storm. "It's for the family. It's wholesome. What's she going to say?" Brenda just gave me a look that said, "You sweet, naive fool." But I was a man on a mission for refreshment. I navigated to the HOA's website, a relic from 1998 that probably violated its own rules on aesthetic harmony. I found the architectural and landscaping modification request form. It was a PDF so poorly designed it was practically a cry for help. I filled it out, my heart swelling with the righteous fury of a man who just wants to float on an inflatable donut with a cold beer. Under Description of Project, I wrote, Installation of 1-1. Summer Oasis, 3,000 above-ground pool for purposes of seasonal recreational activities and the prevention of heat stroke-related insanity. I attached the stock photo from the website, hit send, and leaned back in my chair, a smug grin on my face. It was done. The first step toward our watery paradise was taken. In a world of petty tyrants and beige mailboxes, a small victory for the common man was just an email away. What could possibly go wrong? The waiting was an agony of its own. Every ping from my phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. For 3 days, I compulsively refreshed my inbox, expecting to see a cheerful, "Approved! Enjoy your summer!" from the HOA. I imagined the automated response would include a GIF of a smiling family splashing around. What I got instead was an email with a subject line so cold it could have flash-frozen a mammoth. Regarding your recent modification request. It was from Carol. The body of the email was a masterpiece of corporate speak and passive-aggressive politeness. Dear Mr. Miller, thank you for your submission. After a thorough review by the Architectural Review Committee, we regret to inform you that your request for the installation of a Summer Oasis 3000 has been denied. As per the Maple Creek Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, Bylaw 74, Section C, Subsection RIV. No temporary structures, including but not limited to sheds, trampolines, or pools of a temporary or above-ground nature, exceeding 24 inches in height are permitted on any property lot. We appreciate your commitment to maintaining the aesthetic integrity of our community. Should you have any questions, please feel free to consult the bylaws at your convenience. Sincerely, Carol Jenkins, President, Maple Creek HOA. I read it 3 times. Aesthetic integrity? She was talking about a blue plastic tub. Subsection IV? It was a dagger made of legalese, twisted with glee. My vision went a little red around the edges. A primal rage, born of heat and frustration, bubbled up in my chest. I didn't say a word. I just stood up, pushed my chair back so hard it screeched against the patio, and started walking. Frank, where are you going? Brenda called after me. I'm going to consult the bylaws, I growled, in person. Carol's house was 4 doors down, a beige fortress of conformity. As I approached, I saw her, kneeling in her flower bed, tending to her petunias with the delicate precision of a bomb disposal expert. She was wearing khaki capris, a white polo shirt, and a visor that seemed to absorb all light and happiness from its immediate vicinity. She heard my footsteps on the sidewalk and looked up, her face a carefully blank mask. Frank, she said, her voice as crisp as a freshly ironed shirt. Can I help you? My pool, Carol, I said, trying to keep my voice even. You denied my pool. Your request, she corrected, snipping a perfectly healthy leaf from a petunia. And yes, the committee did. It's a clear violation of Bylaw 74C. It's a kid's pool. It's for cooling off. Are you aware that the sun is currently trying to murder us all with extreme prejudice? The bylaws are in place to protect our property values, she said, her gaze drifting past me to my own lawn, probably checking for non-compliant dandelion growth. An above-ground pool is an eyesore. It lowers the tone of the neighborhood. The tone of the neighborhood? I was sputtering now. It's a pool, Carol, not a flaming monster truck. The kids would love it. It would build community. We could have neighborly splashes. She finally stood up and faced me, wiping a speck of non-existent dirt from her gardening glove. Her eyes were like 2 little chips of granite. The bylaws are the bylaws, Frank. They aren't open to interpretation. They are what separates us from the chaos of, well, other neighborhoods. She gestured vaguely in the direction of the highway. Perhaps you should consider a membership at the community center. I hear their splash pad is lovely." And with that, she turned back to her flowers, the conversation officially over. I stood there for a full minute, steam practically pouring out of my ears. The sheer, unadulterated smugness of it all. It wasn't about property values. It was about power. It was about her being able to say no. I trudged back home, the picture of defeat. I slumped into my patio chair, the rejection email still burning on my tablet screen. Brenda came out and sat next to me, putting a consoling hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, honey," she said softly. "She suggested the community center," I muttered. "The place that smells like chlorine and broken dreams." I ranted for a good 10 minutes, pacing back and forth, outlining all the ways Carol was single-handedly ruining summer. Brenda listened patiently, nodding in all the right places. When I finally ran out of steam, she said, "Maybe we can get one of those fancy sprinklers, the kind that looks like a giant octopus?" I just stared at her. An octopus sprinkler. That was my consolation prize. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The reasonable, law-abiding Frank Miller clocked out for the season. In his place was a new Frank. A Frank fueled by spite and a thirst for loophole-driven justice. Later that night, long after Brenda had gone to bed, I sat in the dark, my face illuminated by the glow of the tablet. I wasn't just reading the bylaws anymore. I was studying them. I was hunting. There were rules about sheds, fences, flagpoles, satellite dishes, and, of course, pools. But as I scrolled through the hundreds of pages of prohibitions and regulations, I started to notice what wasn't there. And deep in the recesses of my heat-stroked, vengeful mind, a tiny, terrible, beautiful idea began to form. I wasn't looking for a loophole to get a pool anymore. I was looking for a weapon. 2 a.m. is the hour of bad decisions and brilliant epiphanies, and I was neck-deep in both. Fueled by the dregs of a pot of coffee and a burning sense of injustice, I had fallen down an internet rabbit hole that began with unusual lawn ornaments and had since spiraled into something far more majestic. I had bypassed the pink flamingos and concrete gnomes and found myself in the strange, wonderful back alley of the internet. Government surplus auction sites. These sites were a treasure trove of things no sane person needed, but every curious person wanted. There were desks from decommissioned post offices, fleets of slightly used Ford Crown Victorias, and enough khaki-colored filing cabinets to build a stairway to the moon. I clicked a tab labeled Military and Maritime. There were listings for old Humvees, jet engine cowlings that could be turned into avant-garde fire pits, and then I saw it. The picture was grainy, taken on a cloudy day in what looked like a dreary naval yard. It was long, black, and cylindrical, resting on giant wooden blocks. The title read, DSV-4 Tadpole, Class Research Submarine, 1971. Non-operational, hull and basic fittings only. As-is, where is. It was 50 feet long. It weighed 20 tons. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. My brain, which had been grinding away uselessly for hours, suddenly kicked into hyperdrive. A frantic energy surged through me. With trembling fingers, I pulled up the PDF of the HOA bylaws on a split screen. My eyes scanned the document, not for what I couldn't do, but for what the bylaws had failed to imagine I would do. Sheds, banned. Pools, banned. Fences over 6 feet, banned. Gazebos, required a permit signed in triplicate by God himself. But what about submarines? I typed submarine into the search bar. 0 results. I tried boat. Nothing. Vessel? Nothing. Maritime? Crickets. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I found the section on vehicles. Bylaw 112. Section A. No commercial trucks, recreational vehicles, trailers, or unregistered vehicles may be parked on a property for more than 48 hours. That was it. That was the key. It wasn't a structure, it wasn't a building, it was a vehicle, a decommissioned, non-operational 20-ton lawn art vehicle. And as long as it was registered, who was to say I couldn't park it? The term parked was even debatable. I wasn't parking it, I was displaying it. I started laughing. It started as a low chuckle, a quiet rumble of insanity, and quickly escalated into a full-blown, wheezing cackle. It was the laugh of a man who had stared into the abyss of suburban regulations and found the abyss blinking first. The sound woke Brenda. "Frank?" she mumbled from the bedroom. "What's going on? Are you watching a comedy special?" I grabbed the tablet and stumbled into the bedroom, my face glowing with maniacal glee. "Better," I whispered, shoving the screen in her face. "Brenda, my love, I'm not going to build a pool. I'm going to acquire a lawn ornament." She squinted at the picture of the rusty submarine, then at my wild-eyed expression. "Frank, it's 2 a.m. Please tell me you haven't been drinking?" "I'm drunk on pure, unadulterated genius," I declared. The next morning, after a tense breakfast where Brenda mostly just sighed and rubbed her temples, I made the most important call of the entire operation. I called Dave. Dave is my best friend, my partner in crime. The devil on my shoulder who always has a can of gasoline and a lighter handy when I have a bad idea. I laid out the whole story. The heat, the pool, Carol's smug rejection, the bylaws, and the glorious 50-foot solution I'd found on Zoxtions.gov. I finished my monologue and waited. There was a long, thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. "So, let me get this straight," Dave said slowly, his voice laced with a dangerous level of excitement. "To get back at the HOA for not letting you have a little plastic pool, you are going to buy a literal military-grade submarine and put it on your front lawn." "Research submarine," I corrected. "But yes, that's the gist of it." Another pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "Frank," he said, his voice now trembling with suppressed laughter, "you are a legend. An absolute, unhinged legend. I'm coming over right now. We need a whiteboard and a bigger pot of coffee. This is Operation Landlocked Leviathan." And just like that, the plan was no longer a crazy dream. It was a mission. The next weekend, my living room looked like a conspiracy theorist's command center. Dave had, in fact, brought a whiteboard, which now dominated one wall, covered in scribbles, calculations, and a surprisingly detailed, if not entirely accurate, drawing of a submarine. Brenda referred to it as the Wall of Insanity, and made a point of walking past it with a wide berth and a heavy sigh. "Okay, bidding strategy," Dave said, pointing a laser pointer at the board. "These auctions are all about psychology, Frank. You can't just go in with your max bid, you have to play it cool. Lurk. Let the amateurs fight it out. Then you swoop in like a bald eagle of pettiness in the final minutes." The auction for the DSV-4 tadpole was a week long. For 6 days and 23 hours we watched. The price crept up slowly. $500, $800, $1,200. A few other weirdos, probably aspiring supervillains or eccentric scrap metal enthusiasts, were in the running. My stomach was in knots. Every time a new bid came in, I felt a fresh wave of panic. "What if we don't get it?" I asked, pacing my living room. "Then we get the decommissioned traffic light from Scranton," Dave said, not looking up from his laptop. "But we're getting the sub. Trust the process." In the final 5 minutes of the auction, the bidding war began. The price jumped from $2,500 to $4,000 in a matter of seconds. My hands were slick with sweat. "Now?" I hissed. "Not yet," Dave said, his eyes narrowed. "Let them feel victory. Let them taste it." With 30 seconds left, The high bid was $5,250. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Dave." "Okay," he said, his voice calm. "Hit him with the knockout. 7 grand. I typed in the number, my fingers fumbling on the keyboard. I placed the bid. The screen refreshed. We were the high bidder. 10 seconds. 9. 8. A new bid popped up. $7,250. "He's got fight in him," Dave yelled. "Go to 9, go big or go home." I typed $9,000. Click. 7 seconds. 6. 5. The screen was frozen in time. 4, 3, 2, 1. A new screen loaded. "Congratulations, you have won this auction." We erupted. Dave and I were jumping up and down like we'd just won the Super Bowl. In the midst of our celebration, an email dinged on my laptop. It was the invoice. The Submarine itself was $9,000. Underneath that was a new line item. Shipping, handling, and logistics estimate, $14,500. My celebration screeched to a halt. Dave peered over my shoulder. "Oof, the shipping is more than the ship." Brenda walked in, drawn by the noise. She took one look at the invoice on the screen, then at my pale face. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just put her hands on her hips and said, in a voice that was dangerously calm, "You spent our kitchen renovation money on a rusty tube of metal, didn't you, Frank?" "Think of it this way," I said weakly. "We don't need a new kitchen if we eat all our meals outside, on our Submarine." The look she gave me could have curdled milk. The next hurdle was even more daunting. Getting the thing from a naval yard in Virginia to my front lawn in Ohio. I spent a full day calling heavy-haul trucking companies. The first 3 calls ended with the dispatcher laughing and hanging up on me. The 4th person asked if I was sober. I was beginning to lose hope when I found a listing online for Gus's Heavy Haulin' and Odd Jobs. The website looked like it was made by a high schooler in 1999, but the tagline was promising. "If it's big and weird, we move it," I called. A gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Gus." I took a deep breath. "Hi, Gus. My name is Frank Miller. I have a somewhat unconventional job for you." "I'm listening." "I need you to transport a submarine," I said, bracing for laughter. There was a pause, but not a laughing one. It was a thinking pause. I heard the sound of a mug clinking against a saucer. "Okay," Gus said. "From where to where?" I was so surprised by his nonchalance, I almost forgot the details. A naval yard in coastal Virginia to a residential street in suburban Ohio." 50-footer? "Yeah, about that. 20 tons. Gonna need a wide-load escort through Pennsylvania. That's state law," he rumbled. "You got permits for that." "Permits?" I squeaked. "Don't worry, I got a guy. You gonna need a crane for the lift on the receiving end?" I would assume so. It's going on my front lawn." Another pause. I heard him take a long, slow sip of what I could only assume was black coffee. "Okay, lawn's gonna get torn up. Gonna need some plywood to spread the load. We can lay new sod after, but it's extra. I can have a truck in Virginia by Thursday. We can get it to you by next Tuesday. That work?" I was speechless. This man, this glorious, unflappable man, was talking about moving a submarine to my lawn like he was quoting a price for moving a sofa. "Tuesday," I stammered. "Tuesday works great, Gus." "All right. I'll text you the quote. You pay half up front, half on delivery. Pleasure doing business with you, Frank." He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, a sense of profound wonder washing over me. Gus was real. The submarine was real. This was actually happening. Operation Landlocked Leviathan was a go. Tuesday arrived with a sense of cinematic dread. The sky was a hazy, ominous gray, and the air was thick with the promise of either a thunderstorm or an unprecedented event in suburban history. I had told Brenda that our large piece of modern art was arriving today. She had responded by taking a Xanax and retreating to her sister's house for the day, muttering something about plausible deniability. Dave came over at 9 a.m., armed with a cooler full of beer and a pair of binoculars, for reconnaissance. We sat on my porch like two generals awaiting a pivotal battle. At precisely 10:47 a.m., we heard it. A low, guttural rumble that was distinctly not a mail truck or a garbage truck. A monstrous red Peterbilt cab appeared at the end of our cul-de-sac, followed by a flatbed trailer so long it had to take the turn in a three-point maneuver. And there it was, my submarine. It was bigger and rustier than I remembered from the pictures. It was a magnificent, hulking beast of Cold War engineering, a monument to ridiculousness strapped to a trailer. As the truck driver expertly navigated the last few feet, the trailer's back end swung wide, catching the Hendersons' mailbox and neatly decapitating it. The little red flag on top flew through the air and landed silently on their lawn. "First casualty of the war," Dave whispered with reverence. One by one, the doors of the surrounding houses opened. Mr. Henderson, mid-hedge trim, let his clippers fall from his hands. Mrs. Gable from across the street, who was getting her groceries, stood frozen, a bag of oranges clutched to her chest. A group of kids on bikes skidded to a halt, their mouths agape. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from the neighborhood group chat. Just 3 letters from the guy next door. WTF? Moments later, a second, even larger truck rumbled up. A crane. Gus himself emerged from the cab of the transport truck. He was even bigger than he sounded on the phone, a mountain of a man with a beard that looked like it had its own ecosystem. He nodded at me. "Frank, she's a beaut." "Gus," I said, my voice a little shaky. "She is." Gus and his crew worked with a terrifying, beautiful efficiency. They laid down massive sheets of plywood on my lawn, positioned the crane, and attached thick straps around the hull of the submarine. There was a groan of stressed metal as the crane took the strain, and then slowly, impossibly, my 20-ton submarine was airborne. It floated over my driveway, its shadow passing over my roof like a slow-motion eclipse. The neighborhood was silent, watching this absurd spectacle unfold. With the gentle precision of a surgeon, the crane operator lowered the sub onto the concrete supports I'd poured the week before. It settled with a soft, final thump that seemed to shake the very foundations of the subdivision. My prize-winning azalea bush, a point of pride, was now a flattened smudge of green and pink beneath the stern, a small price to pay for victory. I was admiring my new lawn ornament, a feeling of pure, unadulterated triumph swelling in my chest, when I heard the voice that haunted the dreams of every homeowner in Maple Creek. "Frank Miller!" Carol was marching across my lawn, her face a thundercloud of incandescent rage. She was waving a rolled-up copy of the HOA bylaws like a scepter. "What is that?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the submarine. I leaned against the cool metal hull, folded my arms, and gave her my most pleasant smile. "It's my new boat, Carol." "A boat? This is a weapon of war. You can't have a boat here." "Now, Carol, that's where you're mistaken," I said, savoring every word. "I'd like to direct your attention to page 147 of our beloved bylaws. Bylaw 112, Section A. It clearly states, no unregistered vehicles may be parked on a property for more than 48 hours. Well, she's a vehicle, and I assure you, she is registered. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a novelty license plate I'd had made online. I held it up for her to see. It read, Pool B&D. Her face went from red to a sort of pale, blotchy purple. She was sputtering, unable to form a coherent sentence. Finally, she whipped out her phone and stabbed at the screen. "I'm calling the police! This is a public nuisance, a monstrosity!" Sure enough, 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers got out. The first, Miller, was young and looked like he'd just graduated from the academy. His eyes were wide as saucers as he took in the scene. The second officer, Johnson, was older, with a weary face that said he'd seen it all. But as he looked at my submarine, the corners of his mouth twitched. "Sir," Officer Miller said, his voice cracking slightly, "we've had a report of a submarine on your lawn." "That's right, officer," I said politely. "Is there a problem?" Carroll shoved the bylaws at him. "It's a violation. It's an eyesore. It destroyed a mailbox. It's a blight." Officer Johnson ignored her and began a slow walk around the submarine, tapping the hull with his knuckle. "Well, I'll be," he said to himself. He looked at me. "It's not blocking the sidewalk. Doesn't appear to be a public right-of-way obstruction. Is this thing operational?" "Nope," I said cheerfully. "No engine, no fuel, no periscope. It's just a big metal lawn gnome, really." Johnson nodded slowly, stroking his chin. "Well, ma'am," he said, turning to Carroll, "as far as I can tell, no laws are being broken here. The mailbox is a civil issue between you and your neighbor, and the, vehicle seems to be on his private property. This is a matter for your homeowners association, not the police department." Officer Miller looked relieved. Carroll looked like she was about to have an aneurysm. As the 2 officers got back in their car, Johnson caught my eye. He gave me a slow, almost imperceptible wink before closing his door. The cruiser pulled away, leaving me, Dave, Carroll, and a 50-foot submarine in a silent, tense tableau on my perfectly manicured and now thoroughly ruined front lawn. Dave cracked open 2 beers and handed one to me. "Checkmate," he whispered. The wink from Officer Johnson was a small victory, but I knew the war was far from over. Carroll wasn't the type to accept defeat. She was the type to retreat, re-strategize, and return with overwhelming force. The first volley of her counterattack arrived in my mailbox 2 days later, delivered in a crisp, threatening envelope from the HOA's legal counsel. It was a cease and desist letter, followed by a list of fines. They were hitting me for everything they could think of. $500. Fine. Unapproved landscaping alteration for the crushed azalea and the compacted lawn. $750. Fine. Improper vehicle storage. They were now classifying the submarine as a derelict vehicle, despite my novelty plate. $1,000. Fine. Aesthetic nuisance. A vague, catch-all charge that was clearly just Carroll's rage converted into a dollar amount. $100/day. Fine. Continued violation of the above infractions. My stomach dropped. This was going to get expensive. Brenda saw the letter, and her face went pale. "Frank, this isn't funny anymore. They're going to sue us. We could lose the house." "They can't do that," I said with more confidence than I felt. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on." "Our lawn is currently being occupied by a submarine," she countered. "I don't think illegal legs are a factor in this universe anymore." Before I could formulate a response, Dave, my agent of chaos, struck again. He had, without my knowledge, called a friend of his who worked for a local news station. That afternoon, a news van with a giant satellite dish on top pulled into our cul-de-sac. A reporter with impossibly white teeth and perfect hair, a woman named Tiffany Chase, was soon standing on my lawn, a microphone in her hand. "So, Mr. Miller," she said, the camera light bright in my eyes. "You can imagine the calls we got about this. A submarine in the suburbs. You have to tell me, what's the story here?" And so I told her. I told her about the heat, the simple dream of a pool, the HOA's rejection, and my deep dive into the bylaws. I framed it as a classic David versus Goliath story, a tale of one man fighting back against the tyranny of petty rules. I tried to sound reasonable and charming, like a slightly eccentric but ultimately relatable everyman. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news. By 7, it was on their website. By 9, it had been picked up by a national news aggregator. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing with calls from reporters from all over the country. The headline was always some variation of, "Suburban Man buys submarine in HOA spat." The Submarine, which I had officially christened The Compliance, became a local celebrity. People started making pilgrimages to our street, driving by slowly, taking pictures. A teenager with a drone got some incredible aerial footage. Someone started a Team Frank Facebook group. A local brewery even called me and asked if they could name a new IPA, landlocked lager, in my honor. I decided to lean into my new role as a suburban folk hero. I went to the hardware store and bought several gallons of cheerful, bright yellow paint. Dave and I spent a weekend painting The Compliance, transforming it from a drab military relic into a piece of pop art. We painted a big, smiling shark face on the nose, just to annoy Carol a little more. We bought a couple of cheap plastic lawn chairs and put them on the flat top deck, creating a makeshift patio. During a weekend BBQ, I filled the conning tower with ice and used it as the world's most over-engineered beer cooler. The fines from the HOA kept coming, the letters growing more threatening, but the court of public opinion was firmly on my side. I was the quirky underdog, and Carol was the villain. But the pressure was mounting. The legal fees were no joke, and every time Brenda checked the mail, her anxiety grew. One evening, after another day of news vans and curious onlookers, she sat me down. "Frank, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. I really am," she said, her voice soft but strained. "But I'm scared. This has gotten bigger than we can handle. What's the end game here? Are we just going to live with a submarine on our lawn and a mountain of debt forever?" It was a fair question, and for the first time since this whole insane adventure began, I didn't have a good answer. The siege was working. I had won the battle, but I was starting to worry I was about to lose the war. The breaking point came in the form of a notice taped to every door in Maple Creek Estates. The HOA was calling an emergency all-hands meeting at the community center. The agenda had 2 items: to vote on a proposed amendment to the bylaws, specifically Bylaw 112B, which would henceforth ban any and all maritime vessels, submersible or otherwise, exceeding 10 feet in length; to authorize the HOA board to proceed with a lawsuit against Frank Miller for the immediate removal of his structure and payment of all accrued fines, totaling at that point over $15,000. This was it. Carol was making her final move, mobilizing the entire neighborhood to codify my defeat into law. The night of the meeting, the community center's multi-purpose room was packed. It had the tense, buzzing atmosphere of a courtroom before a verdict is read. I saw neighbors who hadn't spoken in years whispering to each other. Dave was there, giving me a thumbs up from the back. Brenda sat next to me, her hand squeezing mine so tightly my knuckles were white. Carol stood at a lectern at the front of the room, looking smug and triumphant. She launched into a PowerPoint presentation she had clearly spent days preparing. The first slide was a picture of my beautiful yellow submarine, taken from an unflattering angle that made it look like a beached whale carcass. "An aesthetic blight," the slide read in a grim, blocky font. She went on for 20 minutes, her voice droning on about property values, community standards, and the dangerous precedent set by what she called my act of suburban terrorism. She showed pictures of the tire tracks on my lawn, the decapitated mailbox, which the Hendersons had already replaced, and a zoomed-in shot of the shark face, which she described as aggressively non-compliant. She was painting me as a menace, a lunatic who had single-handedly dragged their pristine subdivision into the gutter. As she spoke, I saw some heads in the crowd nodding along. My heart sank. When she finished, she opened the floor for discussion before the vote, clearly expecting a chorus of agreement. A few of her known cronies stood up to say how disgraceful the whole situation was. And then there was silence. This was my moment. My legs felt a little weak as I stood up. All eyes turned to me. "I don't have a PowerPoint," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "And I'll be the first to admit, this is all completely ridiculous." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. "Yes, I have a 50-foot submarine on my lawn. It's yellow. It has a shark face. It's probably not what the founding fathers of Maple Creek Estates had in mind when they wrote the bylaws." I took a deep breath. "But do you know why it's there? It's there because on the hottest day of the year, I asked for permission to put up a simple, 15-foot-wide plastic tub of water in my own backyard so my family could cool off. And I was told no. I was told it would damage the aesthetic integrity of our community." I looked around the room, making eye contact with my neighbors. Now, I know I'm not the only one. "Mr. Henderson," I said, pointing to my neighbor, "last year you were fined $200 because your basketball hoop was 2 inches too high, weren't you?" He blinked, surprised, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I was." "And the Gables," I continued, pointing to the couple across the street. "Didn't you get a formal warning because your daughter's welcome home sign from college was up for more than 24 hours? Mrs. Gable's eyes widened. "We did! Carol said it was an unapproved banner." One by one, I started pointing out the petty infractions, the little power trips that everyone had suffered in silence. The non-compliant gnome hat, the tonally aggressive wind chimes, the citation for leaving a garbage can out for 3 hours too long after pickup. With each example, the mood in the room shifted. It was no longer about my submarine. It was about all of them. "This isn't about a submarine, and it was never about a pool," I said, my voice rising with passion. "It's about living in a neighborhood, not a museum. It's about being able to live on your own property without being afraid you're going to get a fine for planting the wrong color of impatience. My submarine is ridiculous, I know it is, but it's a monument to how ridiculous things have gotten around here. Don't vote to ban the submarine. Vote to get our neighborhood back." When I sat down, the room was silent for a beat. Then someone in the back started clapping. It was Mr. Henderson. Then Mrs. Gable joined in. Soon, the entire room, save for Carol and her small band of loyalists, was giving a standing ovation. The vote on the submarine bylaw was called. It was defeated in a landslide. Then, someone from the back of the room shouted, "I'd like to make a new motion, a vote of no confidence in Carol Jenkins as HOA president." The motion was seconded immediately. The vote was a sea of raised hands. Carol's reign of terror was over. She stood at the lectern, her face pale and slack with shock, and for the first time since I'd met her, she had absolutely nothing to say. The week after the town hall tussle felt like the end of a long, oppressive winter. A new interim HOA board was elected, headed by a cheerful guy named Bill from down the street, whose primary platform was fewer rules, more block parties. The first official act of the new board was to unanimously vote to drop all fines and legal actions against me. Their second act was to pass an amendment to Bylaw 74C, the one that had started it all. It now allowed for reasonable seasonal recreational structures, with a picture of an above-ground pool included as a prime example. I had won. It was a total unconditional victory, which left me with one rather large 20-ton problem. "So," Brenda said one evening, as we sat on the porch looking at the compliance, which was now gleaming in the sunset. "What's the plan for it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I could call Gus, see what he'd charge to haul it to a scrapyard." Just then, the Henderson kids came tearing across our lawn, followed by a half-dozen other neighborhood children. They didn't even slow down, scrambling up the side of the submarine's hull like it was the world's greatest piece of playground equipment. Mr. Henderson waved from his yard. "Thanks again, Frank. They've been playing on that thing all day. Haven't looked at a screen once." Brenda watched them, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "it's kind of grown on me. It's a landmark." And she was right. It had become part of the neighborhood's identity. It was a tourist attraction, a jungle gym, and a fantastic conversation starter. It was a symbol of our little suburban rebellion. Selling it for scrap felt wrong. It felt like tearing down a monument. "What if we keep it?" I asked, almost afraid to say it out loud. Brenda looked at the kids, laughing, then at the house, then back at me. "Okay," she said, "but we're planting flowers around it. Some nice, hardy perennials. Something yellow to match." And so the new normal began. Life with a submarine. The story ends a month later. It's the middle of August, and the sun is once again doing its level best to cook us alive. I'm sitting in a lawn chair perched on the conning tower of my submarine, a cold, landlocked logger in my hand. From my vantage point, I can see the whole cul-de-sac. Dave is sitting in the chair next to me, binoculars in hand, on watch. Below me, on the lawn, the yellow submarine is surrounded by a beautiful bed of black-eyed Susans. It looks strangely at home. And in my backyard, nestled in the space where the azalea bush used to be, sits a brand-new, HOA-approved Summer Oasis 3000. It's filled with sparkling blue water, and splashing around in it are Brenda, the Henderson kids, and half the families on the block. The air is filled with laughter and the happy shrieks of children. Dave lowers his binoculars and takes a long sip of his beer. "You know," he says, looking from the pool to the submarine and back again, "for a guy who just wanted a pool, you really took the scenic route. I look out at my kingdom, my beautiful, chaotic, slightly unhinged kingdom. The kids splashing, the neighbors chatting over the fence, the ridiculous yellow monument to spite holding court on my front lawn." "Yeah, well," I say, taking a drink and smiling. "Sometimes you have to torpedo the system to make a splash." And for the first time all summer, it didn't feel hot at all. It felt perfect.